Hi Wolves. Today we are making a melodic trap song. It sounds like this. In this video I'm going to be showing you all the different tracks and samples, drums, and processing that goes into making a song like this. If you want to listen to the finished version, I will leave a link for you to stream it in the description. For now, let's get into it. Starting with the intro, it sounds like this. There's a little bit of ambiance. It's just a lake recording that I took on my phone just to give it some atmosphere. And some Foley, just some drums to give it a little bit more atmosphere in the intro. This lead pluck. This is a bell preset I made. It's pretty simple. It's just a lot of sine waves with a low pass. And then standard effects, distortion, with delay, reverb. The way this intro is structured is this melody is a polymeter of what plays in the verse. The verse sounds like this. So if I were to take that and put it here, and then if I were to get all the notes and make them all twice as long, that is a polymeter because it's playing the same melody, but it's taking twice as long to play it. And that's a good trick for introductions and variations in this genre because it just can make your melody sound more interesting, sound like it has more layers to it than maybe it really does because it is just the same melody, it's just taking longer. You can also make it play twice as fast. That's still a polymeter. It's a pretty good trick. There is this same pluck with a lot of reverb on it, just to give some more atmosphere to the intro. And then some tonal ambiance with an auto filter, and then I'm automating the cutoff of the auto filter to give it a little bit more space. It's being panned left and right also. The first verse starts, it sounds like this. So we have that same pluck. We have a cymbal transition going between the intro and the verse. That will play throughout the entire song to transition in between sections and give it some atmosphere. There's also a downlifter that plays. I'm not even using it as a downlifter though, I'm just using it for white noise, and then it's reversed to transition at the halfway point, and that plays along with the other transition. It's really good to have white noise in electronic music in general, but especially in this genre, just to fill out the frequency spectrum. It doesn't even have to be super loud, just to have it there makes a big difference. There's this pad that plays, it's playing a chord. I have a YouTube short about how to make this pad. It's basically two sine waves. One is up an octave, and then the chord is just these notes. G, D sharp, D, C as a chord. I don't have the Serum preset in front of me right now, but I do have a YouTube short that shows how to make it. It is pretty simple, and it sounds pretty good. There's still the tonal ambiance with the auto filter. The bass here is that same pad, but it's monophonic, so it only plays one note at a time, and then it's just the lowest note in the chord. The drums are pretty simple. There's just a kick and a hi-hat loop. The hi-hat loop also has an auto filter on it to give it a little bit of variation, so it doesn't sound the exact same the entire time. It's at least just a little bit different. And then we transition out of the verse into the build. It sounds like this. The drums here are similar. It's the same kick as the verse, the same hi-hat loop, but the hi-hat loop is repeating every bar. There's a clap loop and a clap transition. These are really important in your builds. I like to always have like some kind of downlifter like this. It just works for builds, works really well. Second clap that comes in halfway through just to make the second half of the build a little bit more intense, and it has a low pass or high pass automation. High pass automations are really good for builds. You'll see how it becomes more intense. Not a lot, but a little bit. These small things add up over time. Another downlifter. This is a riser that I made from the vocal sample. I just put a lot of delay and a phaser on the vocal sample, and then just turned the feedback up a lot, and then recorded it. And this string that I also turned into a riser. We'll get to the processing for this. These are both used in the drop. The vocals in the intro is just this sample saying hello. And then it goes through delay and reverb. The delay and reverb mix is mapped to a macro that's controlled by an envelope follower, so as the vocal starts and they say hello, the mix on the delay and reverb is really far down, so the dry signal is cutting through a lot, and then as I'm fading out, there is more delay and reverb. And then this group turns off eventually before the drop, but the delay is really good for the verse to give it more atmosphere. And then kind of a turnaround I made from another vocal sample just to transition between the sections of the song. This is like a fourth of the way through the verse. It plays this turnaround, and then like again 3/4 of the way through the verse there's a different turnaround. So there's only 2 variations of this, and I think that's really all you need. If it was just this first one, if that played like every 10 seconds, you'd get sick of it. But if there's another one with variation, you don't really even notice how repetitive it is. And I tried to add like a 3rd and 4th variation, and none of them were really working out. So I just have these 2. And they repeat pretty much for the entire song. And that just continues all the way through the build. And then for the leads, there's this string. It is an instrument rack. It's just these strings in Ableton preset. And then Serum playing the Swim Lonely Saw. I have a YouTube short about how to make this. It's pretty old now. I think it's probably from October. And together, the string and the saw sound like this. And then I recorded that with a lot of reverb to use that for the build. And that's also what this riser is. And it's being pitched up 24 semitones, so this is being pitched up 2 octaves. That's what gives it the riser sound. So we transition into the first drop. That sounds like this. I'll start with the drums here. They sound like this. The pre-drop is a tom fill. For this genre, I like to use toms a lot. I think they give a lot of depth to the song. There's a reverb snare. That's just this snare with a lot of reverb on it. Recorded to audio and then reversed. It's really important to have something like that. A lot of electronic genres, especially I think house, uses these reverse snares all the time. Like sometimes they're before every kick and snare. I think that can be overkill, but it does sound good. There's this cymbal transition. I'm kind of using it as a crash, but it also has the pre-shift to give it more of a transition effect. A hi-hat loop. There's a couple of different hi-hat loops in this, and I kind of chopped them up for variation. So that's 2 different hi-hat loops that are playing. Having 2 of them just gives it a little bit of variation. There's this ride. It is pitched up 7 semitones. And then it goes down, so it is basically playing C, A sharp, G. Not because that's what it's actually tuned to, just because that's how many semitones I boosted it, and it's playing the C, A sharp, G because that is what the melody is playing, is C, A sharp, G. So it's going down in pitch over time, just to give it a little bit of variation. It makes the whole song sound a little bit more musical. When you're making a melodic song like this, you want to try and find as many different instruments to kind of tune or at least create variations that follow the melody to make everything sound more melodic, really. This kick is a super low, punchy kick, and then I put erosion on it to give it a little bit more top end. Because without erosion, you just hear kind of the punch of the kick. And then with erosion, it's kind of almost creating some kind of masking where it sounds like it's a completely different kick, but it's literally just putting white noise at the top end. We got a snare here with a metallic sound that is at like 800 hertz. It's pretty good for trap music. And then there's a variation that has more release. Just to give it a little bit more variation, I always like to have the second snare just be a little bit longer or a little bit lower in pitch. The reverse snare plays before that one. And then on the fourth snare, it plays with it, just to give it even more variation. The vocals in the drop are using that same delay follow trick. So the dry signal cuts through, but it still has the delay. There's some reverses. It's always good to have these reverses in here. They just sound really trappy and nice. They just fit this genre so well. This is the main lead. It's a pluck. I have a YouTube short about how to make it because I don't have the Serum preset in front of me. It's called How to Make My Favorite Pluck. And I think this is actually my favorite pluck, so it's not even clickbait. It is actually my favorite. It's basically a sine wave and then the evolution wavetable in Serum. We have a reverse of that. And then we have a chord. So this chord is the same as the pluck. It's just changed so it has more attack and release, so it can sound more like a pad. But this is what the pluck is. And the bass. So the bass is made from the evolution wavetable, which is the same wavetable that's in the pluck and the pad to kind of make everything sound similar. So this wavetable, let's see if I drop it down. It sounds really bad, but this is the same wavetable as the bass, so everything sounds similar. And then I just recorded that to audio. This D sharp sounds really good. D sharp is a pretty low note for your sub bass. Usually it's almost too low. It's pretty low. You usually don't want to go that low, at least I'll try to avoid it. But I was able to get this one to sound really good by playing with the wavetable position. You can see how there's this huge peak at 80. It's even louder than the fundamental. At least that's what my EQ is saying. And that's what makes this punch through a little bit more. If this wasn't so high, you really wouldn't hear this that much at all in headphones. And it's actually, I think it sounds so good that I think it actually cuts through a little bit clearer than the G, and the G is 4 semitones higher, so the G should be significantly easier to hear, but it's actually, it's not, just in the way this song is mixed. I ended up turning the D sharp down a lot compared to the G, and I think they still sound really similar in volume. Yeah, I've never gotten a D sharp to sound this good, and so I made sure to save it. And then I couldn't get the G to sound as good, so it almost kind of created a good problem to have. The A sharp is the same thing. The wavetable is just at a different place. That's why you can see now the fundamental is higher than this harmonic. Because the A sharp is, whatever, 7 semitones higher than the D sharp. And so it's going to be a lot easier to hear. And so I made these higher harmonics quieter because you can hear them easier. They don't need to be turned up as much as the D sharp does. Yeah, there's some psychoacoustic science that goes into making sub bass. Maybe someday I'll make a video on that. I'm not sure. At least I like to dial it in a lot like this. Yeah, that's how I made this, and the melody for the bass is following the same thing as this pad. G, D sharp, G, D sharp, and then repeats. And we transition into the second half of the drop. It sounds like this. So this part of the song, if you remember in the beginning of the video when I talked about the polymeter, that's what this is. This is the same melody, but it's taking twice as long to play the melody. And then I also just took out the note at the very start. And then there's a little bit more delay at this point as well. There's essentially the same thing here with the chords. It's essentially a polymeter, so it's taking twice as long to play the same melody, except I'm not playing this third note here. So we just played G to D sharp, and then the bass is doing that same thing. The vocals stay pretty much the same. There's a little bit of imaging done here. It's being panned right to left, and the lead is being panned right to left as well. Right here. Yep. This is a trick I learned from one of Vincent's songs. Basically, the first 2 bars here, you pan left and right, and then you can go back to the center. I mean, you could just keep panning it left and right, but it makes it sound more interesting to just do it here, especially when you're playing quarter notes or half notes like this. So it's like one note is in your left ear, the next is in your right, the next is in your left. And then anything else that's in a similar part of the frequency spectrum, you put in the opposite ear. And then after the first 2 bars, it goes back to normal. Obviously, you don't have to do it for 2 bars. You don't have to do it for every instrument. But it's a good trick to have in your arsenal. And then we transition out of the drop. And we are using LFOs and reverb to create this fluttering sound. So there's an LFO that is mapped to a macro here called wub, and that wub is turning up an EQ shelf and just the gain. And then that LFO gets faster. So that wub is happening more and more. There's another macro for the depth. The depth is turning up the amount of reverb and the amount of multiband compression. If I didn't have this multiband compressor, you would kind of stop hearing it. You'd hear it more because I'm also just turning the gain up like 30 decibels by the end of it. That's how this sound is able to continue for so long after the drop. After the drop, the rate goes down of the wub and the depth goes down, so there ends up being less amount of reverb, multiband compression, and the speed that it's going up and down is decreasing. And I couldn't get it to sound right without adding in some more layers in the low mids, because without these layers here, there was just like a peak around 1000 hertz and it just sounded like white noise. It sounded still kind of cool, but not nearly as melodic or musical as I wanted it to. So I added these layers. This is just the chord and the string from the build. And then we transition into the second verse. So I like to have the second verse be different, usually more intense or less intense, depends. This time it's less intense. We're still using the same instruments, but we're just playing one note instead of the full melody here. And it's just, this pluck is just playing the chords that the pad was playing. The pad has more bass in the second verse. I'm not using the sub bass that I had in the first verse, so we are using the low end of the pad. The other layers are the same, the reverb pluck and the tonal ambiance with the auto filter. Halfway through, the kick comes in and this string starts again. And then we transition into the second build. I like to have the second build be different, usually more intense. This one is a little bit more intense because it has the clap start right away. And halfway through we have the snare. This is just a sample of the snare. This is the drop snare. It's just playing really fast, and then there's an aggressive bandpass with a shifter on it. So as the drop progresses, or as the build progresses, it's getting pitched up. And we are playing higher frequencies. You want to make sure you pitch it up and then do the bandpass. But yeah, the risers are the same. There's still the same hi-hat, it's just not as loud. There's still another clap layer. this really quick percussion right before the halfway point. It's a good thing to put into your builds to kind of give it a little bit more rhythm. Then we are playing the lead pluck here. And we're bringing it in with a low pass. And because this lead pluck is here, I decided not to use the chord layer that was in the first build, because it's good to just kind of swap out parts instead of just adding things, just to avoid things getting too messy. And also I just wanted the second build to be different than the first. So we transition into the second drop. There's a little bit of variation in the lead in this drop. Like right here, there's just a little bit of a longer gap, just an eighth note longer gap before one of these notes hits. Here, I'm playing more eighth notes. The main variation, I don't even know if you can really hear it, but the first note on the downbeat is up an octave. That's a good trick to give some variation between your drops, is not only just changing the octave. I mean, you can always just bring the whole thing up or down one octave, but if you just change the octave of some of the notes, that can work too. That combined with just shifting some of the notes off an eighth note to give it a little bit more rhythm is usually enough to give it some variation. I was going to have this string play. I was going to play this counter melody. That was going to be the main variation in the second drop, and that's usually a really good idea, especially in melodic music, especially in melodic bass and trap music, to just have a string playing a counter melody to give some variation and more atmosphere. But I think it was just making this song a little bit too messy. I kept this part here just to show you in the video. This is what it would have sounded like. Usually that's a really good idea. I thought it was deviating a little too much from how I wanted it to sound. The string was making it too melodic, if that's even a thing. It was too musical and too melodic, and I don't want it to be that melodic. I want it to be more trappy and more focused on the pluck as the lead, and not how musical it can be if I like add some strings and other things and counter melodies in there. But usually this would have been a good idea. It's just for this song, I personally didn't like how it was sounding. But I'll leave it in here for the second half of the drop so you can hear it. There's also some variation in the vocals here. This wasn't in the first drop. This is that same sample, but then it is up an octave and it's playing G, and then it's playing D sharp. That's what the pad and the bass are playing. Just to give it a little bit more variation. I could have gone even further with that and made it more melodic and have it actually play the entire counter melody that the string is playing. But I didn't think the song needed it. I already have these vocals turned down a lot because I just didn't think that they were really needed. But they are in the second drop just to give it a little bit more variation. The drums wash out at the end. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't, actually. Okay. The vocals have a washout. So I'm just automating the amount of reverb and cutting out some of the highs and lows at this point in the song. This is really because it makes it sound cool. It gives it atmosphere, but it also is a good way to tell the listener that this part of the song is ending. For the outro, I think it's good to make your outro melodic and not just end the song right there. I think this is usually a good time to use the polymeter and just some other variation that you didn't have a space to use it in the other parts of the drop. And I think you can kind of get away with a lot. You can kind of put a lot of random things at the end of the song, and it kind of sounds normal because the song is just ending anyways. You don't have to follow it up with anything. I didn't really do that here. These were all in the song already. But I do just sweep up into this final impact at the very end. It's usually a good touch. And DJs will usually like that if you do that with your songs because it's easier to DJ and transition out of. It's just a good thing to keep in mind when you're making your music. I have one kick at the end of the drop, really short and low to give everything something to sidechain to, because all of these reverbs and impacts and downlifters are all hitting at the same time here. I mean, they're a little bit spaced out. Just with the fades, everything is not hitting at the exact same time, but still is in a way. And so the sidechain gives everything just a little bit more space. I'll talk a little bit about the processing on the groups before I end this. For the drop, the leads, bass, and vocals all have a limiter on it just to limit them to around -2. They also have a glue compressor on them. And those all go into the same group, the drop group. On that group, I am just doing some dynamic EQ imaging to control the width, like this band here. It was a little bit too wide. This dot right here, you usually want that to be above half. That just shows if the phase between the left and the right channel are correlated or not. And that just means if you put it in mono, is it going to sound totally different. Usually you want that to be above half. The higher up the frequency spectrum you go, you can have it be closer to the 0 mark. Usually the lower ends, you want it to be all the way up, so it's more mono compatible. In this case, it was too wide, so I'm making it a little bit more thin. And then saturating the width, and then doing more dynamic EQ. The verse drums, build drums, drop drums all go into the same group, and that has similar processing. A little bit of reverb on the entire drum group to pull everything together. Dynamic EQ, imaging, saturating the width. And then the verse leads and effects go into the same group where we're doing the same thing. Dynamic EQ, controlling the width and saturating the width. And then same thing on the main channel, some dynamic EQ. A lot of dynamic EQ, really. Sometimes I use the ozone stabilizer really aggressively, just because it brings out the highs a lot. I don't really recommend doing this. I think you should do that on the individual tracks to bring out these highs. I mean, it would be so much better if I actually went through the leads here and I boosted the highs that much instead of just doing it on the entire track, but whatever. Using the maximizer just to clip everything on the main channel. This is what the finished song sounds like, and so I wanted to put this on when I'm recording this video, but when I export the final version, I take that off. And then I am cutting the gain 2 decibels when it's not the drop. This is a pretty aggressive move to do during the mix, especially to do it after the clipping, but I like it. I like it to be noticeably louder when the drop hits. Sometimes I don't do this. Sometimes 2 decibels is too much. Sometimes doing it after the clipper is too much, but I like to make it louder for sure, because it just signals to the listener that it's the drop and that it's louder. I don't know. I think there's some subconscious part of it there that makes sense. I mean, you don't want your build-up to be louder than your drop. No one wants that. All right, that's it for this one. I am going to play the second drop of the song, then I'll let the video end. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If there's any other videos you want me to make, let me know. If you liked the video, if you learned something, you can like and subscribe. I will leave a link for you to stream the finished song if you want to hear it. That'll be in the description, but for now, I'm going to let this one end. Peace out, y'all.